Hey everybody, Zach again, newtutorial.com, coming in, making a video for you today, and we're going to talk about all of this nonsense that's going on right now. Just crazy amount of stuff happening, and every time, usually an emergency happens, some sort of catastrophe, and I remember going through this. This verse has come up many times in my life, but usually see it during times of disaster. So I saw this in Florida when we went through a couple of hurricanes there when I lived there, and they usually bring Romans 13 out when people are having issues with dealing with government control. It comes up for various reasons. For instance, people who do not support abortion policies. They say, well, the law of the land is this, and Romans 13 says you have to go by the powers that be, and if you don't, you're going to be damned. So does that mean I have to support abortion now? There are people who use Romans 13 out of context all of the time. And it's because they just don't have a good understanding of the Old Testament. They don't have a good understanding of their Bible. And so they use this for all kinds of different ways, wildly out of context. We're going to read Romans 13 now, and then we're going to give you three easy clues of what this really means. And it's always been about the Levites. I'll just say that right up front. It's about the Levites. Always has been about the Levites that Paul was writing about in Romans 13. Let's read it now. So here we go. Verse 1. Let every soul be subject unto the higher powers, for there is no power but of God. The powers that be are ordained by God. Whosoever therefore resists the power resisteth the ordinance of God, and they that resist shall receive to themselves damnation. For the rulers are not a terror to good works, but to the evil. Will you then not be afraid of the power? Do that which is good, and you will have praise of the same. For he is the minister of God to thee for good. But if you do that which is evil, be afraid, for he bears not the sword in vain, for he is the minister of God, a revenger to execute wrath upon him that does evil. Wherefore ye must needs be subject, not only for wrath, but also for conscience sake. For this cause pay ye tribute also, for they are God's ministers, attending continually upon this very thing. Render therefore to all their dues, tribute to whom tribute is due, custom to whom custom, fear to whom fear, honor to whom honor. Okay, so those 7 verses are usually the ones that people take out of context. So when some government official comes knocking on at your door and says, you need to do this, there are people in the church who will say, well, we have to do what he says because of Romans 13, because they're the powers that be, and if we don't do what they say, then we're going to be at risk of eternal damnation. I don't know if you guys have heard these verses thrown around like this before, like I have, but I have certainly heard these verses thrown around like this. 3 quick clues. Now, my opinion here and my point is that this is talking about the Levites. Paul here is writing to the Levites, and one of the things we don't have in front of us is the letter that Paul received that he is replying to. Okay, Romans, the book of Romans, the letter of Romans, the epistle of Romans, is a letter back to Rome, responding to a letter that he received. So we don't know what that letter was talking about that he's responding to. But he gives some really good clues here. Number 1, he talks about the ministers of God. Who were the ministers of God? Over and over again, Deuteronomy 18:7, Numbers chapter 1, verse 50, talk about the ministers of God. Who is that? Let's go ahead and read Deuteronomy 18:7. Then he, being the Levites, shall minister in the name of the Lord his God, and all his brothers, the Levites, which stand there before the Lord. Okay, the Levites, that was their job, was to minister to the Father, minister to the priest, and minister to the vessels that were part of the tabernacle. They were the ministers of God. So when Paul is referring to the minister, they are the ministers of God. Is a king in the Torah or anywhere else in the Bible ever called a minister of God? Show me. I don't know that. I don't see that anywhere. But I do know the Levites were absolutely called the ministers of God over and over again. Okay, the second clue he gives is that they bear not the sword in vain. It was the Levites who always took the sword in their hand and dealt justice when it needed to be done. When Dinah was raped, or Dinah, however you want to pronounce it, one of the daughter of Jacob, the only daughter we know about. We don't know if he had other daughters, but we do know about her because she was very clearly raped in the book of Genesis. And the brothers were very upset about it. What did Levi and Simeon do? As Levi, they kind of tore the town apart when that happened. So Levi, from the very beginning, always held the sword. And who was it that went out and killed the 3,000 people at Mount Sinai because of their disobedience? It was the Levites who did that. We have other verses where it talks about the Levites. If you've done any study on the temple, it was the Levites who wore the sword because it was their job to cut down any stranger or alien who came near without the right protocols at the temple. Let's go ahead and take a look at this verse in Numbers chapter 18. Verse 7, therefore you and your sons with thee shall keep your priest's office for everything of the altar and within the veil, and ye shall serve. I have given your priest office unto you as a service of gift, and the stranger that comes near shall be put to death. And then Numbers chapter 1, verse 51, and when the tabernacle sets forward, the Levites shall take it down, and when the tabernacle is to be pitched, the Levites shall set it up, and the stranger that comes near shall be put to death. So it's the Levites who always have that sword in hand, ready to go and being able to defend the faith. It was Phinehas, again, a Levite, who basically killed those two people with a spear when they were doing something in sight of the tent of meeting. So it's always the Levites. It's the Levites who bear not the sword in vain. Again, another good clue about the Levites. And the third clue, the third and final clue is this, is who is worthy of tribute. Do we really need to go through all of the verses that talk about the tenth of tithe that comes and goes to the Levites, whether that's the fruits of your labor when it comes to cattle, when it comes to what you've grown, what you've made in wine, all these things, or whatever you bind up as money because it's too far for you to travel, and then you give to the Levites. You are to give to the Levites your tribute, because why? They have no inheritance. Israel and what you make is their inheritance. What you produce, Israel, is their inheritance. That's what they get. Tribute to whom tribute is due. Why is it due? Because they have no inheritance. Paul's words very clearly, if you pay attention, if you have some sort of understanding of the front of the book, will give you an idea of what he's talking about. It's not talking about politicians. It's not talking about kings. In fact, if you go ahead and do the research, it was kings that had obligations to tend to. Things they had to do. They had to, or they were restricted from having multiple wives, or having multiple horses, or having building up their gold and silver and their riches. Why? So it says he didn't elevate himself above his brothers. So he does not elevate himself above his brethren. So it's that, because in our day and age, it's if you achieve a certain position, you're giving certain perks with that. You can do this, you can do that. And why do you think politicians go into office and they're poor, but when they get out of office, they're multimillionaires? Because the old saying is true. Power corrupts, absolute power corrupts absolutely. And the Bible's like, no, you get no special privileges being king. In fact, you weren't supposed to be a king. You weren't even supposed to have a king. But what did they do? And the Father knew that back in Deuteronomy 17. Again, it goes through these things. It says, when you place a king above you, even though I don't want you to, you're going to do it, just like all the other nations out there. The king is limited. He can't do certain things. That's kind of like, I think that's one of the reasons I think our country was so blessed in the last 200 years in so many ways, is because the Constitution that we have put powers on government. The Torah also puts powers on government, on people, or puts limits of power. Limits of power on government and people. You can't elevate yourself above others. And so I think that's one of the reasons we're so blessed in this country, because our country kind of did the same thing. And that's very not normal compared to other places around the world, and especially throughout history. But Deuteronomy 17 very clearly says, so you will not elevate yourself above your brothers, because that's very easy to do when you're in places of power. My whole point in this is that people in power love to take more power. And what you see, sadly, is during these times, people taking the Bible out of context, Romans 13 as an example, and using it to justify some of the overreaches of government and some of the overreaches of some of these politicians that we're seeing right now today. Michigan, I think it's Michigan, right? Michigan, Illinois, New York, California. What was the other one? Kentucky, that new governor they have in Kentucky. I mean, man, he's lucky he's not up for re-election. I mean, it's really gone crazy, some of these things that they're doing. You can't even leave your house. I mean, to go to your neighbors, even if they're family. I mean, it's crazy. It really drives me nuts when I see people using Romans 13 as justification for some of these abuses of power. And it's not just in government. It's also in churches. I have seen pastor after pastor say, you have to, listen to me and do what I tell you to do because of Romans 13. I'm the power it's talking about. I am the appointed ruler over you. And I'm there because God has placed me there. And so now you have to support me, because if you don't, you need eternal damnation. I'm not kidding you. I've seen pastors say that. I've seen pastors say that Romans 13 applies to them. That's really scary, especially when you look at all the other verses in your Bible about being debased and abased. I do not want to be that way. And that's why so many people, when they come to me and they say, hey, Zach, you should start a church. You should be a pastor. No, absolutely not. I don't want any piece of that pie ever, ever, ever. Until one day I have an actual burning bush moment, I will never be in that position, because I don't ever want to put myself in a position where power can corrupt me. I don't want that position. I prefer just being on this little mountain on here and just reaching out to you through YouTube and just telling you my opinion. I'm just a commentator. I am nobody. I'm nothing. I'm just as sinful as the next person. And if you put your trust in any man, he will always fail you 100% of the time. Every time. So I don't ever want to be that guy, because I'm just as bad as everyone else. So yeah. Romans 13, it drives me nuts a little bit. It drives me a little crazy, because I see people abusing that for their own power. And I see people on Facebook even bringing it up, saying, we need to deal with this abuse of power and all these things going on right now, because Romans 13 warns us, Paul warns us, that our souls are at risk by not doing what our rulers, our leaders tell us to do. Drives me a little bit crazy. So anyway, I think that's it. Oh, my notes here. I'm enjoying my new studio here. I got set up. I hope I'm sounding pretty good. I'm waiting for lighting to get here. I have some lighting set up, but I'm waiting for more to get here. It's taking forever because Amazon is too busy sending food out to all the people who can't get it at grocery stores. I'm guilty of that. I ordered coffee the other day on Amazon because I didn't want to, I was scared I wasn't going to get good coffee anymore. Thankfully, Tim came back with some from the store for me that he found. But anyway, I'll give you a tour of the studio coming up in another video. And but I appreciate every one of you guys tuning in. And yeah, I've seen this Romans 13 come up quite a bit in the last couple weeks. And I was like, I got to do a video on this. I've done it before on Romans 13, but I got to do another one. Keep it current. All right, guys, we'll leave it at that. See you next time. Go home, read your Bible. Bye.